our next speaker coming up. His talk is going to be focused on scaling APIs, successful digital transformation initiatives, and some of the anti-patterns that contribute to early successes but a later failure to scale. I want to extend a warm welcome to Erik Wilde. Hey, Erik. You're currently muted at the moment.
Classic, yeah.
How many times do we say that in meetings?
I know. We should have a button that just says that. You're on mute.
So Erik is joining us from Zurich in Switzerland, and he's currently an API catalyst at Axway. Previously, he was at CA's API Academy. So he's been in the API space for 10 years. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about this topic today. If you want to bring up your presentation.
Should be there now.
Perfect. Amazing.
Okay.
Take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Catherine, and thanks Apidays for hosting me, giving me the opportunity to talk. What I want to talk about today, and maybe the title is a little bit drastic, so to speak, but is why sometimes the API journey that an organization is on might not go quite as smoothly. And the focus I'll be having is a little bit different from the previous talk. So the previous talk was very much about how to expose APIs to the outside, which of course is really important, and nowadays is, in many cases, it's not even optional anymore. But in many cases, you have also initiatives that just try to enable APIs more on the internal level, right? Having teams collaborate through APIs, having an internal rich API landscape. And in many cases, there are some problems to make this work really well. And in most cases, these things don't really plainly fail, but there are some patterns that I've seen in my work where it doesn't work perfectly. And I thought it not just talking about success stories, but also talking about things that you see that seem to be repeating patterns where things are not working great. Sharing those things might be interesting as well. And this is what I'm doing today. So just very briefly about myself, like Catherine said, so I've been in the API space for quite a while. Until last year, I did a lot of traveling. I've been to many API Days events, definitely my favorite API series of conferences globally. But as we all know, it's something that we can't do anymore. So what I've done since then is I've tried to change the way that I engage with the API community a little bit. So now I put quite a bit of energy into producing videos. If you want to, please check out my YouTube channel. I'm trying to post conversations with people who are practitioners in the API space, a couple of learning videos and so forth. So it's just something, once again, to keep engaged with the API community. Why am I doing this? My role is that of a catalyst at Axway. So Axway is a software company, and we have software products in the API space, most importantly, a traditional gateway plus a catalog that allows you to manage your APIs across a very heterogeneous infrastructure. So the idea there is that you can have all your APIs regardless of how you technically manage them and put them into this catalog. Now, in many cases, the question then is not so much just how do I make it work? Of course, you need to make it work as well. That's why we are producing this software. But you also need to have a program in place that actually makes sure that these APIs exist, that are used, that everybody contributes to the APIs in an organization. And this is where things sometimes get a little bit tricky. And my part of this whole API journey that an organization is on is to help organizations to do this more effectively and to make sure that if they invest into APIs, they're getting the most out of their investments. And in many cases, the problem there is not so much or not only technological, making things work like on a mechanical level, but it's also a problem of getting traction, getting adoption, shifting mindsets, all these kind of things. And this is what I want to talk about today. So I'll just give you a brief introduction, a little bit of the context, and then I'll walk you through 4 anti-patterns that I've seen that sometimes make it hard for API programs, API initiatives to be as successful as they could be. Now, I think the hard part in many cases that I've seen, and I talk to a lot of large organizations. So Axway has 11,000 customers, so we have a pretty good customer base. And a lot of them, of course, are not necessarily digital organizations, right? Everybody has some digital stuff, of course, nowadays, but there's still many organizations that are not inherently digital. Their main products and services are maybe a little bit older or just not in the digital space. But you still have to think about how to digitalize things, right? How to build up digital value chains, how to do that, how to make sure that you change them when it's necessary, and so forth. And so the challenge there often is that you're trying to transform a non-digital organization into something that is more digital, more digitalized. And that can be the hard part. And the hard part then really often is not so much just how to do that technologically. I mean, that also can be hard, right? But then we all know how this works. Maybe you build something where people can track things better or give feedback better, connect them to their mobile devices better, kind of the standard patterns. But the problem then also is, how do you get your business to the point where they are taking more advantage of these opportunities? So it's not just something where you say, oh, it would be nice if we had an app, but you also understand the implications of it, and that you have to update it, that maybe you have to make sure that it's available on different platforms and so forth. And the even bigger challenge often is also to make sure that everybody in the organization understands what that means. Meaning that if you build something, you have to make sure that it can be reused by somebody else, so that these digital value chains can be built up more easily. And what we see, and I don't want to go too far into this, but if you look at the slides, they're online. You'll be able to follow the links. They're just linked from those images. This one is a link to a study from McKinsey. It's been from when this, I think it's about 2 years old. And what they found is that a lot of initiatives in organizations around digitalization have a problem with scaling, right? So they start a program, they see initial successes, and now they are thinking, oh, now we can just roll it out. Everybody gets on board because we've shown that there are opportunities to capture, and then this doesn't work too well. So I don't want to go into the details of this, but what's important to take away from this is that the biggest problems happen when an organization has started the digitalization initiatives and now tries to scale it up internally. And the biggest reasons why that happens are actually reasons that are under the organization's control. So it's not something that happens to them. It's something that they could do better if they knew how. And another study I just would like to share with you is by the Boston Consulting Group. And there's tons of studies out there, and most of them show roughly the same thing, which is only around 30% of these digital transformation initiatives are rated as successful if the organizations themselves are rating them and saying, yeah, this worked as we were hoping it would work. And many others are not as successful as was hoped for. Now, you might argue that sometimes maybe expectations are a little bit overblown, because it's not like suddenly the whole organization will completely change its identity and how it works just because somebody starts using APIs. And that's definitely true. But it's still something to keep in mind, right? And for us as the API community, I think it is important that we keep an eye on making the things that we do as impactful as we can. Also understanding that our influence is limited, right? We can't change everything, but just trying to understand that we want to change as much as we possibly can. I think that's the main thing here, understanding that some things that you do or that you don't address might stand in your own path. And these are the things I would like to talk about. And what I would like to talk about are anti-patterns. And an anti-pattern is you definitely know design patterns, right? So design patterns are something very popular in the software and IT space. An anti-pattern is pretty similar, and it's defined very simply as something that is used quite a bit. You see it emerging over and over again. That may look like a good idea in the beginning, but then in the end actually turns out to be not a good solution. It creates more bad outcomes than good ones. And it's also something where you can do better things, and it's well known what these better things look like. And because I think these anti-patterns are important to know, and because I've seen those anti-patterns in quite a number of organizations, I would like to share some of them. Let's get started. So anti-pattern number one, I call technological determinism. And technological determinism, sometimes people also say, build it and they will come, right? This idea that you build an API platform and nobody's using it, right? And or not as many teams in the organization as you were hoping for. And we see that a lot because as a software vendor, right, we go into organizations, we put a platform in place, that platform works, but then nobody starts using it. And the reason for that is that, well, just putting it there doesn't necessarily mean that people are interested in using it and are not necessarily, they don't even know what to put there. So what we need to do to overcome this is we need to understand that people need to know why they should do it, and they also should know what an API actually should do. So what's a good API to contribute? APIs come in many different shapes and forms, and some of them are probably more useful and better designed than others. So how can they do this? Right? And this is something where it's really important to help people in the organization to understand the value and to do the right thing. And I think for us in the API space, we have kind of a little bit of like a blindness in the spot of, we think that, yeah, it's clear that APIs are useful, and why would anybody not agree to that and know at least a little bit what an API should do? But it's not as clear to many as we think it is. And it still takes a lot of convincing, in particular, like I said, if you are in organizations that don't have this like naturally digital mindset. So keep that in mind, right? You're very much focused in on APIs, but it's still important that you explain, that you convince, and also that you celebrate. So explain to people what APIs are and why they're necessary, right? Explain how that works. Some people still don't quite understand, for example, the difference between more traditional integration patterns and APIs. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's also important to convince people that this is an important and essential part of digital transformation, that without APIs, digital transformation is not possible. And it's also important to celebrate these successes and say, well, if we have some APIs that are being contributed, that are useful, that are being used, then we actually make sure that people hear about it, right? And we point people at those teams and say, look, this team created this API, and because of this, we now have this application, which is driving new customers, which is improving customer success, whatever it is doing. But it's something where it's important for people to understand that, yes, these APIs are not just like another exercise we have to go through. They help us to make the organization become better. So that's really important. Okay, that was anti-pattern number one. Anti-pattern number two, quantity over quality. And this anti-pattern starts with the sometimes simplistic idea that surely more APIs are better than fewer APIs. And of course, yes, if all APIs were equal, that would be true, but they're not. And my favorite story is from a telco, and the number is real, where they had, like, I spoke to the people running the platform, and they had one example we spoke about, which was about getting customer information. Right? And you had to use, this number is real, 17 different APIs to make any sense out of the information that you were getting, right? And it was a very intricate, it's like you get this here, then you need this API, then you match those, and you get this from over here. And that was because it was very low level database kind of access APIs. And it also was because the team producing the APIs had this simple metric, like do more. And it was not in their interest to just create one API instead of those 17. Right now, you might argue that, well, that's not very nice of that team, and that's true. But it is something where you are very easily seeing that there was the wrong incentive in place, right? Because for sure, an API is only successful and will only help the organization when it's being used, right? If it exists and nobody uses it, it's pointless. It doesn't change anything, right? So you always have to think about how can I make APIs in the way that they are getting used. And that's a very important shift in focus. And it's also something where if you go API first, right, we have to say, well, if I'm API first, like everybody will use what I'm doing through my API. So I better make sure this API is a really, really, really good one. Because if it's bad, I'm hurting myself a lot, right? And so this is a pattern where you really have to shift the mindset from APIs, and we don't care what these APIs are, because any API is a good API, to no, a good API is an API that is used, and that is used so that it drives value, right? So if an API contributes to value that your organization is creating, then it's good and helpful. And that is a metric that makes sense. But these more lower level metrics that are more about quantity tend to hurt things. Not necessarily, but I've definitely seen that happening. So make sure to have an eye on those KPIs that you might have so that you don't put the wrong incentives in place. Right? And when it comes to where should I invest, also think about which places are not yet API enabled and how could they benefit most from getting a good API so that the potential usage that there is turned into actual usage, right? That the capability suddenly then is used much more because it is made available through a good API, not just an API, but a good API. Okay, let's move forward. Next anti-pattern, and that anti-pattern I call beware the uni API. And the uni API is something I just call that because basically it's the good old integration pattern. And it's sometimes when you talk to, in particular, people with, let's say, a longer history in IT, right, you get these grumpy type guys or women, often, most often guys, to be honest, who are saying, well, we've been doing that for the last 30 years. What are we even talking about here, right? And technically, they're right. I mean, we've been doing APIs for actually more than 30 years since computers were invented. So the first mention, basically, of this concept is like 70 years old. But the point is not so much that, of course, APIs are always getting used when you start writing software. The point really is that for APIs, the idea is to build things that encapsulate value and that are being reused, right? Creating products. And that is really important. And that is with the Uni API, right? That's the pattern where it's this integration mindset is, oh, I have to connect those two components. So I will create an integration project where those two components get connected. And when they're connected, I declare victory and move on to my next task, right? That's the good old let's connect stuff pattern, which is the one that has been used in the last 30 years. But the difference that we're seeing really is to say, yes, we're still connecting IT components. That's true. But we're trying to do that in a way that aligns with business and organizational structure, right? And that is a significant difference because this now means that even if we are a little bit more from the IT side, we have to make sure that we do the right thing so that we can help the organization to become better at changing things, to become better at unlocking value that is available, better at adapting to changes in the environment, and so forth. And we want to help the organization to be able to do that without having these expensive and hard integration projects, right? So that is a difference. It's a significant difference. And like I said, sometimes when you get these grumpy people, it can take a little while of convincing them, but it makes sense because it is a different mindset that you have behind it. And it's also something where instead of them just doing their architecture somewhere in the engine room, now it becomes something that is relevant for the business. So we have to make sure it's done well, that business is aligned with what is happening in the engine room there. And one example that I start using more and more is to say, well, to show what we're doing here, even we might have an organization-wide thing where we present the API of the week, right? A digital building block that everybody can understand, not just IT people, everybody can understand, right? And say, look, here's a valuable service that we have for our customers. It's now available as an API. Build it into experiences, build it into products, build stuff on top of it, right? So that people start understanding that what we're trying to do is to build up this library of digital building blocks. And the more valuable and the more reusable those are, the more we help the overall effort. Okay, now let's move on to the last anti-pattern, which I call the return of the EIM. And I would guess that most of you don't even know what EIM means. It means Enterprise Information Model. And it was something that has been around forever. And it's this trend that I think by now is a little bit smaller, but it used to be that it was like the model all the things, right? And the idea was that if you have a perfect formal model of your organization, often used in UML or in some other language, right? If you modeled everything, then it would be very easy to have all kind of tooling or automation and everything would be great. And APIs sometimes are kind of reinvigorating people to, again, try to do that. And the point is this approach doesn't work. I've seen this in many organizations. And the problem with this, like building the perfect model of what we're currently doing so that we can then kind of drive automation from this, is always that once we're done building this model, we're already doing things differently, right? So it's this thing where you say it's just too much effort. We can't afford to do it because what we have to do is to be able to change when things around us change or when business says, hey, we should do things differently. And that is where sometimes I think the APIs spark or reinvigorate this trend of let's model everything that we have. And I still see this trend sometimes appearing somewhere, right? This model-driven, I call it model-driven whatever. And model-driven whatever, it will never disappear, but it is not a great way to do things, because in most cases, it just limits your possibilities too much. It's too slow. And it's something that just makes sure that things don't change. And we want things to change as fast as we can. So don't walk into this trap of saying, oh, now that we have APIs, we surely must make sure they all follow the exact same model. That's not the point. Now that we have APIs, we have to embrace the diversity that comes with that and say, well, if we have different parts of the organization where we talk about customers, we may talk about customers in a different way, because for different APIs, for different building blocks, for different teams talking about customers, they have a different model of the customer, right? For one, a lot is about maybe the history. For another one, a lot is about the future, the potential of a customer. For another one, it's maybe about the billing for a customer, right? So they have very different views of a customer. So it's totally fine that different APIs around customers have different models of the customer. So embrace diversity. Don't walk into this trap of trying to harmonize and standardize everything. It's good to provide building blocks and say, look, if you don't know what a customer looks like, here are APIs, for example, where we talk about customers. Maybe you can reuse one of those. And if you use JSON schema, you might actually have like little schemas that people can reuse. But they also should have the ability to say, yeah, that schema works for you, but it doesn't work for me, because in my API, a customer is represented in a very different way because I have a very different perspective on a customer, right? So APIs are something where in the end you will end up with a relatively diverse zoo of APIs, and that's fine. No problem with that. Okay, and with that we are already at the end. So what I want to leave you with is to say API journeys often have a problem scaling. We've just see that happening in practice a lot. And that's not good, because the main power of APIs is when scaling happens, you get more and more APIs, and then you get what's called the network effect, where once you are past sort of a critical mass of building blocks, you can build more and more things out of these building blocks because you have more to play around with, so to speak, right? So we have to make sure that we don't become complacent with saying, look, we have a couple of very successful APIs, but most of the enterprise is not yet using APIs. We have to try to make sure that everybody comes on board for this journey, because only then we can make things really successful. So be aware that, right, that starting the API journey typically is harder than scaling it. But we have experience in so many organizations that we do know what to look out for. And identifying and overcoming some of these anti-patterns might help you to understand maybe why scaling is an issue, and maybe to also get past that. With that, I'm done. I would like to thank you for listening to this presentation. Thanks again to Apidays Australia for hosting this talk. If you want to look at the slides, they're online at the link that you can see here. I will also post a link on my Twitter feed in the next couple of minutes, so you can find them there. They're browser-based, so you will find some links in there to the, for example, to the articles that I was talking about. And if you want to get more information about myself, look at some of my videos and so forth, here are some of my social media links on Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of this wonderful event, even though I think there's not that much left, but at least there's a little bit more to come, and I think it's one more of these just wonderful API Days events.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erik. Erik, I know you're very active on YouTube and Twitter especially, so everybody, you can definitely reach out there.
Follow me!
Yes, follow, like, subscribe. I think we do have a couple of minutes left. I'd just like to ask you maybe just one question. I thought the anti-patterns were very well explained. I was especially interested when you were talking about the model-driven API anti-pattern. And I'm just wondering, sometimes it's really difficult to get like leadership to be on board with this, and you're still trying to like drive this effort. What are some ways that you've like seen or like done to overcome this?
It's really funny that you say that, because I had a fifth anti-pattern, which was, you know, like, your leadership isn't on board. What to do now? And I took it out because I had too many. But it's a very, very good question. Yes. So yeah, convincing leadership can be hard. So starting with the not so nice parts, right? I mean, I've seen people literally moving to other companies because they were frustrated that leadership wasn't really getting on board, right? Because it can be kind of an upstream thing to do if you're kind of getting people excited, or you try to, and then it's not really something where they think that it's one of their priorities, because it isn't, right? Like, leadership isn't really making it one of the priorities. So yes, that can be hard and can be frustrating if it doesn't happen. So, but the best way to get leadership on board, or to try to get them on board, is really to create these kind of success stories, right? Where you say, look, we built it that way, and we were able to, for example, roll out not just, let's say, an iPhone app, but because we actually created an API for that is used from the iPhone app. Now it was also something that we could use in our web app or use in a different thing, right? So we just made the way how we can build customer experience, for example, we made it better. And that is something that if we repeat this pattern, this will just allow us to build these things in a more flexible and faster and cheaper way. But we have to make sure that everybody does it that way, because otherwise we end up in this old picture where all these things get locked into specific products and cannot be reused, right? And if you have these cases, then you can present them and you can make your point and say, look, like, because we were able to onboard to onboard users in the web app, we now have this many more users that we were able to onboard because we had this new thing in there that actually makes it more attractive, and this translates to those numbers. If you have those cases, that's great, but it's definitely something where you have to, in the end, you just have to make your point and say, why is this relevant for the business, right? You just have to find something where you can make this point.
Yeah, I hear you. It's really about identifying value.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say, before we end off, thank you so much for joining us in the execution stream today. I really enjoyed your talk. I'm sure everyone else did as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Catherine.